Can you pass the salt, please? Thank you.
I'm going to tell you our story, and so you'll have a better understanding of why we have a climate crisis. So I've been battling this project known as the CPV Valley Fracked Gas Power Plant, and as you can see here, it's built on bribes and built on lies. It's a 680 megawatt frack gas power plant, and it was built specifically to facilitate the shutdown of Indian Point. So this is 680 megawatts of dirty fracked gas, methane, the worst possible poison for the planet, the worst possible climate culprit.
Why does hardly anybody care about the largest source of clean electricity in all of New York State being shut down? The answer, of course, is because of lies of groups like Riverkeeper. Indian Point is dangerous. We don't need it. We have wind and the sun. Repeated often enough by politicians, renewable interests, big gas, and community organizers around the world, these lies are becoming a sort of pseudo-fact. Not actually true, but nobody questions them anymore.
When Indian Point 2 was closed this year and replaced by gas, the release of additional greenhouse gases wiped out the ongoing environmental gains achieved by wind and solar energy. It will be worse when Indian Point 3 closes next April. Much of the replacement electricity may come from dirty peaker plants, which would particularly be harmful if the extreme weather forces these dirty old plants to burn oil.
I want to keep Indian Point open because when they shut Indian Point down, it means they open up more natural gas burning capacity in Queens. And that means my wife, who has asthma, is at risk. That means my daughter, who is 9 years old, is at risk. My neighbors are at risk. And so Indian Point makes sense. It's a steady supply of clean power. I love renewables. I love solar. I love wind. But they are not enough at this moment in time. We need a steady, clean supply of electricity for New York City, for downstate New York, for this country, and we need nuclear power. So let's keep Indian Point open.
Yay!
I offer today two propositions that can be shown to be true, though they are rejected today by many environmentalists and climate change advocates. For many years I didn't believe them either. Renewable energy in the form of solar and wind sources are too widely dispersed and too weather dependent to replace fossil fuels, reliable and cost effective as the sole or even the principal source of energy of our modern society. Nuclear power can and must replace fossil fuels. It is the only energy source that can do so reliably, safely and economically. We are fortunate to have it.
The Cricket Valley Energy Center was proposed in 2009 and approved in 2012 by New York's Department of Environmental Conservation. It consumes natural gas delivered via the Iroquois pipeline. So Cricket Valley, which is an 1,100 megawatt plant, is the largest of 3 new gas power plants built or proposed in the years since Indian Point's decommissioning was announced. And it's the closest to my home. I've been fighting this plant for the past 3 years based on the environmental, health, and climate harms that it brings. The other 2 plants, CPV Valley Energy and Danskammer, are located in Wawayanda and Newburgh, respectively. CPV Valley Energy is a 630 megawatt plant, and Danskammer is a 550 megawatt plant. It's no doubt that these plants exist in order to compensate for the capacity that was lost and will be lost with the closure of Indian Point 2 and eventually Indian Point 3. Combined, these 3 plants will produce at least 8 million metric tons of CO2 each year. This is a conservative estimate. It doesn't take into account the upstream impacts of the methane these plants will burn. If that were taken into account, the global warming potential would look more like 30 million tons of CO2 equivalent.
We have zero wind in downstate New York, and solar is about 1% of total demand. We have no transmission lines, and our energy demand is about flat throughout this period. The repowering of existing plants is currently happening. Astoria Energy is building, Gowanus is building, Danskammer is building. These are old fossil plants that are being repowered to make up for the difference in the population dense areas of New York City, Queens, Brooklyn, elsewhere. This is the blueprint for New York State's energy policy that was spelled out, and it is being played out exactly as prophesied by Riverkeeper. There is a war going on for your mind. If you're thinking, you're winning.
If you look at energy policy in the US in the last 20 years, the greatest phenomenon that has reduced coal has been gas. So thank you, gas, but now we're at a new point where we need something else to displace gas. And that's why we think that nuclear has the reliability and efficiency of fossil fuels, but without the negative externalities like carbon emissions, but other ones also like air pollution, land use, material intensity. So we really want to encourage anybody who is an environmentalist to get past the headlines and the slogans and the bumper stickers and really challenge yourself to look holistically at every energy source. And we think that if you do that, then you will see that we really need to have nuclear in the mix in order to have a cleaner society. So we would hope that you would support us in trying to save Indian Point in the meantime, and perhaps even expand more nuclear power plants in the future. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Follow the science.
France gets 70% of its power from one carbon-free source, Sweden 40%, Switzerland 36%, the United States 20%. For those who wish to create a world free of carbon emissions, France is clearly the role model. That source of energy, by the way, is not solar or wind. It's not coal, oil, or natural gas either. It's nuclear. Nuclear energy is not only cleaner than all other forms of energy, it's also cheaper to create, abundant, and safe. Yes, safe. So if the world is going to end in a few years because of global warming due to rising CO2 levels, why aren't we going all out to produce this abundant, clean, and safe form of energy? Why aren't there dozens of nuclear power plants in development all over the world? Well, we all know the answer, right? Nuclear energy is just too risky. It's too dangerous. So even though we're told we're facing an existential crisis, which means humans may cease to exist, even though we might all wither away in unbearable heat, or starve because of worldwide droughts, or drown in rising seas, or be killed in Mad Max-style riots, nuclear energy is off the table because it's too darn risky. I want to make sure I have this right. The goal is to save humanity, there's a way to save humanity, and we won't take it, because we're afraid there might be a bad accident or something. Does that make sense to you? Because it doesn't to me. But maybe I'm not giving enough weight to the safety argument. So let's take a closer look at that, since no one, not even the most radical environmentalist, disputes that nuclear power produces massive amounts of energy cleanly and efficiently. Safety, like everything else, is a matter of context. So here's some context. 1.4 million people die worldwide every year in traffic accidents, 2.3 million in work-related accidents, 4.2 million from air pollution. Deaths directly related to nuclear power? Under 200. Not annually, but in the entire history of the nuclear power industry. But what about those famous nuclear disasters we've all heard so much about? Didn't they poison untold thousands? 3 Mile Island in 1979, Chernobyl in 1986, Fukushima in 2011. Okay, let's deal with each one. 3 Mile Island. There was an accident at that plant, yes, but the amount of radiation that leaked was no more than one might receive taking a chest x-ray. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission acknowledged as much 4 weeks after the initial media hysteria died down. We goofed, the commission told Congress. There was no danger of any hydrogen explosion. But that didn't grab the headlines. Chernobyl. The accident developed into a catastrophe only because of pitiful safety procedures unique to the Soviet Union. It would never have occurred in the West. Even so, initial reports of radiation leakage turned out to be grossly exaggerated. According to the World Health Organization, As of mid-2005, that's 19 years after the explosion, fewer than 50 deaths have been directly attributed to radiation from the disaster. Fukushima. In 2011, as a result of an earthquake and tsunami, the Fukushima nuclear power plant was destroyed and nuclear radiation was released. Yet despite the media hysteria, not one person at the nuclear plant died because of radiation leaks. The deaths that occurred in the area were the result of the tsunami. Well, what about the nuclear waste? Surely that's terribly harmful. Actually, no. All the nuclear waste ever generated in the US can fit on a single football field stacked less than 70 feet high. It's easily and safely buried in steel canisters encased in concrete. All this information is easily available, but the anti-nuclear movement, with the help of their media allies, have spent a tremendous amount of time and money obscuring the facts. They're more interested in filing lawsuits against this particular form of clean energy than telling the truth about it. Those endless lawsuits have helped make it prohibitively expensive to build new plants or even keep older ones running. Ironically, one of the anti-nuclear groups that now litigates against nuclear energy, the Sierra Club, was once a great proponent. The legendary early leader of the club, Will Seary, saw it as the best chance to preserve wildlife. Cheap nuclear power in unlimited quantities is one of the chief factors in allowing a large, rapidly growing population to preserve wildlands, open space, and lands of high scenic value, he told the club in 1966. He was right then, and he's right now. It would take dozens of wind and solar farms covering thousands of acres of land to match the energy a single nuclear power plant can produce. From both an environmental and clean energy point of view, there's no contest. If you want to save the planet, then you want to go nuclear. If you want to save the planet and you don't want to go nuclear, then you're just full of hot air. I'm Michael Shellenberger, founder and president of Environmental Progress and the author of Apocalypse Never for Prager University.
The 300-hectare Orano La Hauge plant is located in Normandy, on the extreme tip of the Cotentin Peninsula. Around 4,000 people work there. Its task? To recycle the energy potential of nuclear-used fuels arriving from nuclear power plants in France and abroad. Because having produced energy for 4 to 5 years in the core of a reactor, spent fuel assemblies have to be replaced. And yet these used fuels still contain considerable energy potential, the equivalent of 1/4 of the energy produced by a brand new assembly. The treatment carried out at the La Hauge plant allows the recuperation of the uranium and plutonium contained in the fuel, amounting to 96% of the nuclear material. The remaining 4% are the fission products. This final waste is conditioned in a safe and sustainable way, as are the metallic structures, which are also non-reusable. There are 2 tasks, the recycling of nuclear materials on one hand and the optimum waste management on the other. Explanation. Used fuel assemblies are transported from a nuclear plant to La Hauge site in completely safe casks. They are transferred to a first workshop for reception and storage in ponds. The casks are controlled, prepared, and then docked with perfect tightness to the unloading cell. Here, as in all cells, complete and extremely reliable automation is used. The assemblies are unloaded, cooled, then placed in a storage pond to enable part of the radioactivity to decrease. After several years in the pond, an assembly is taken to a workshop where it will first be cut, a process known as shearing. The end pieces are removed. As for the cladding, which contains the recyclable materials, it is sheared into 35mm sections. The dissolution step allows the recovery of the material contained in the sections for treatment. Inside the dissolver, the sections are plunged into nitric acid. The result? On one side, sections which have been emptied of their material, which are called hulls. The hulls then follow the same treatment line as the end pieces, the same line used for metallic waste. On the other side, nitric acid containing uranium, plutonium, and fission products. The solvent therefore contains recyclable uranium and plutonium and non-recyclable fission products. The extraction step consists in separating these three materials in two phases. Firstly, the fission products are separated from the plutonium and uranium, and secondly, the uranium from the plutonium. Extractions are carried out in the liquid phase. A solvent is used for one element to have an affinity to an organic phase, while the other remains in liquid phase. Like water and oil, the two elements separate naturally. At the end of the extraction cycles, three separated materials are obtained. The fission products, concentrated by evaporation, uranium, also concentrated by evaporation, and plutonium, which is transferred to its workshop for conditioning. The uranium is first purified. This involves removing the last traces of the fission products. Then it is concentrated in liquid form, called uranyl nitrate, to be recycled again in the fuel cycle. The uranyl nitrate is then stored in tanks, before being shipped to be recycled in enrichment and fuel manufacturing plants. The plutonium contains a large quantity of energy. Its treatment consists in changing it from a liquid form to a solid form. For this, it is first purified, then converted into plutonium oxalate, a pulp, using precipitation. Calcination then completes the transformation of the oxalate into a powder, plutonium oxide. The plutonium oxide is finally conditioned in stainless steel boxes, which are placed in cases, which in turn are placed in containers. Particular attention is given to the airtightness and non-contamination of the containers. After a storage phase, they are sent to the Orano La Hauge plant, which makes new fuels called MOX. In nuclear power plants, MOX fuels are used to generate electricity. At each step of the process, the quality of the products is meticulously analyzed. At Orano La Hauge, the purity of the materials obtained is systematically measured by chemical, physical, and isotopic analyses. Materials recycled at Orano La Hauge have a considerable energy potential. 1 gram of plutonium, which equals 100 grams of uranium, represent the energy equivalent of over 1 metric ton of oil. Fission products extracted from the solvent are not recyclable. They contain almost all of the used fuel's radioactivity. They are incorporated in glass frit and conditioned into an extremely stable form for optimized and long-term safety management. This process is called vitrification. Step 1. Evaporation of the nitric acid present in the solution by heating it in a vessel. This enables the concentration of the fission products. Step 2. Precise dosing of the solution to enable fusion with the glass frit. And step 3. The solution is transferred to a calcinator, where it is heated at a very high temperature. Once it leaves the calcinator, the glass frit is added. The mix falls into a melting furnace heated to 1,100 degrees Celsius, which ensures the perfect incorporation of the products and a homogeneous glass form. This guarantees a very chemically stable matrix for several tens of thousands of years. The molten glass obtained is poured into a 175-liter stainless steel container, which is then cooled, welded shut, cleaned, and smear tested to check it is contamination-free. Regarding the metallic structure of the fuel assembly, the hulls and end pieces are rinsed separately. The end pieces in acid and water, the hulls in water. Transported together, the hulls and end pieces will then be precisely sorted by a separator doser to ensure the correct distribution into casings. The filled casings are then compacted under a 2,500 metric ton press. The casing compacting cycle is entirely automated and takes only 12 minutes. The compacted casings are placed in a container which is welded and checked for non-contamination before being sent for storage. With these operations, waste volume is divided by 5, which means a reduced environmental footprint. The containers with vitrified and compacted waste are standardized to facilitate logistics and long-term management. They are stored in total safety in specially designed halls. In line with French law, vitrified and compacted waste from abroad is then returned to the country of origin. Waste from French sources is stored at Orano La Hauge while awaiting the commissioning of the Deep Geological Storage Center, CGO, in northeastern France. Thanks to the treatment process at Orano La Hauge, 96% of recyclable material contained in spent fuel can be recovered to produce electricity again. The final waste is conditioned in a safe and stable form for the long term. Today, Orano La Hauge is the industrial reference in treating used nuclear fuels from nuclear power plants in both France and abroad. Thanks to this know-how unique in the world, the teams of Orano La Hauge contribute to the sustainable management of energy resources in the service of a competitive and safe industry.